objects.
Really?
Agreed.
I put it up against another.
If
And then,
Yeah,
were in
I
school,
remember.
It was
It's not even the shape.
Negative.
Mentally ill.
Did a special effects agency. We are back here, Ethan Claire Podcast Show, episode 93. Back up here with Colin in the attic. How's it going tonight, Colin?
Good to be back. It's been a long week, but we're getting through it.
It has been a long week. There's a lot of stuff going on in the news. There's just things going on all over the place that are keeping us stressed out. But it's all right because we're here. We have a great guest tonight. We have a doctor on the show. We don't get those too often. Usually it's people that claim they're smart, but tonight we have someone that is smart because we went
great.
through the whole thing.
I did.
Dr. Emily Stark, thank you for joining us tonight.
Thank you for having me on. This is fun.
I'm excited because we've only had a couple people on that have this title. So, I mean, it means, I don't know if it means we have the credentials or like we can say we've done, like we've talked to a doctor and we have the professionals. So should I say Dr. Emily or just Emily?
Emily is fine.
Okay,
Yeah.
so you are Professor MSU.
Yes.
And are you from the area or where are you originally from?
I actually grew up just outside St. Peter, Minnesota. So
Okay.
I'm very local.
How did
Yes.
you get into, because you teach psychology, correct?
Yes.
How did you get into that? Is that something when you were a kid you knew you wanted to do, or how did you get into it?
As a kid, I was really interested in science, and I had great like high school science teachers. Chemistry teachers were lighting stuff on fire. It was fun. And so when I went to college, I actually went as a chemistry major because I thought, I like science. I'll work at 3M. I'll make tape. Whatever. It seemed like a good job. And in college, I was sitting in my chem class and my calculus class and thought, this is boring. And this is now finally the real world. And I don't want to do this. And then I took a psychology class because it was a gen ed and I had friends who were psych majors. And I can still remember leaving class the first day because for me, psychology, it was still science, but it was interesting science.
Yeah.
It was the science of people. And so ever since then, I was locked in. And I was never interested in the clinical psych, treating abnormal behaviors. I was more interested in the science of understanding just what your so-called normal person does. And so becoming a professor was kind of one of the few options for that. So, yeah.
So in your field, because when I was going through the thing, on your page on MSU, it said lie detection and then decision making. So talk me through the lie detection because I'm thinking of lie detection as like criminal, like, like I'm sure the FBI teaches lie detection to their people.
They do. They teach it
interrogation.
wrong. Yeah.
They teach it wrong.
So my field is social psychology, which is a really big field, and there's a good part of that that does like overlap with psych and the law and legal system and how do we scientifically study those things that like police do to make sure is this the right approach for it. The thing that interests me about lie detection is there's some studies that show humans, we're not good at detecting lies, and there's a whole, like, evolutionarily speaking, if we're going to live in groups, it's probably good. We got to be able to lie a little bit just to get along with each other. But there's some evidence that says intuitively, like, we can unconsciously pick up when people are lying. And so I might rate a liar. I might say, I don't like you. There's something off about you. I don't trust you. But I can't accurately say if what you're telling me is a truth or a lie. And so I teach a psychology and the law course. And I thought, well, this seems really interesting. It's interesting research to do because I can get students to tell me stories that are truths or lies. And then in my research lab, I show those to other students. And what they do is they have to guess, like, well, is this a true story or false? But then they also rate the person. Like, how much do you like this person? And what I find is that they're just guessing on if it's true or a lie. They don't get it right. It's like they could flip a coin and do just the same. But generally speaking, they like the truth tellers more. They trust them more. So intuitively, they're picking up on something. Their brain is noticing something that they aren't consciously aware of. And so that's the type of thing that's fascinating to me, that unconscious versus conscious. What are we picking up on in our worlds?
It's almost like the Ted Bundy type thing. A likable guy.
Yeah.
People were willing to get in his car, and then he took him home and killed him.
I mean, that's what it means to be a psychopath.
Like,
you're able to pretend to be human, but you don't care about other people. So
how do you pick that out though when you're talking to somebody, because I'm sure that, like you were talking about the criminal aspect, someone comes in and you're doing the interrogation. What are the signs that someone would give off that, okay, this person's lying?
There's very few. So there's not really good, like, standard behavioral signs when someone is lying. And that's a trick. Like police are taught like, oh, if someone can't make eye contact with you, then they're probably lying. No, like maybe they're just stressed.
Yeah.
Maybe because they're innocent and they're telling you the truth, right? So
Or they're just awkward in general.
or they're just awkward, right? Like
Yeah.
there's so many, and so maybe people have individual tells. One sign that actually is pretty useful that I teach my students, like I guess you can't see in the video, like people who like use their hands when they talk, that's authentic. That if you are lying, it's like you're putting so much cognitive focus on coming up with the right story that you lose a lot of those hand movements and other types of gestures because you're so focused on remembering the lie. So it takes more cognitive effort to lie.
Yeah.
And so if there are ways to figure out, it's easier to tell the truth than to lie. So you can kind of get at it that way, but it's really hard. It's very difficult.
Does it have anything to do with the eyes? I know you said eye contact, but where the direction they look. Because I've heard people that are looking up is like they're trying to think of something to say.
Or it's like, well, if you look up and to the right, you're accessing the left hemisphere. All that, no, all that, that's not how the
true.
brain works. Like there are some differences between your left and right hemispheres, but no, it's not true.
What are you finding that students are picking out when they're looking at videos of other students? What are the things that they look for and they say, that's a liar? But then you say, no, that's this.
So it's funny because a lot of them, they do mention that eye contact, like, oh, the person couldn't they weren't maintaining eye contact. And a lot of times it's funny because they'll mention detail. Like sometimes they'll be like, oh, it's too detailed, so it's obviously a lie. But then at the same time they'll turn around and be like, oh, they didn't have enough details, so that's clearly a lie too. So it's a little like when you look at it, you realize this is inconsistent and no one really knows how to figure this out.
So when you're doing it, you are looking at it more at, it's not the personality because that could be a whole bunch of different social things. It's more about the way they're framing it, or what's the direction approach you take to it?
So what I'm interested in is like, is there a difference between like if I'm just scoring you on are you getting it right and guessing if these stories are true or false versus do you like the person or not? And so what I see is if you like the truth tellers and you don't like the liars, but you're still not more accurate than chance at determining their stories, that's telling me your unconscious is helping you a little bit. Like you're picking up something where you don't like the liars, but it's not enough for you to consciously say, oh, I don't like them because they're lying to me. Like people can't quite make that connection. And so then I can play with like, well, if I make it, so like sometimes I'll tell people, well, when you tell me when you're rating people, like you also have to memorize this number. Like if you make it harder for people to pay attention, sometimes that can make your intuition kick in a little bit more because it's like your conscious mind is like busy with other stuff. So you're more focused on that. Well, what else am I picking up? And sometimes that makes them more accurate. So then I can play around, or I can do like personality tests. Like, well, are some people better at detecting liars than other types of people? And the answer is really no. But yeah, so I can play around with a lot of that type of thing.
Have you seen the Chris Watts, Colorado, the guy that murdered his wife and daughters? Have you seen the Netflix?
I haven't seen the Netflix, but I've read a lot about that story.
Very interesting about how the cops show up right away and he's lying off the bat. And the neighbor picked on it like immediately. He's not acting right. He doesn't talk that much. He doesn't ever talk that much, and the way he's talking. And they pulled up the video and everything. And it just one of those things where even like you mentioned, the police, there are regular people that sometimes just have a better intuition of people that are lying and they can tell this than a cop. And that's strange to me because cops and these people that are trained, I don't know how much training they get on it, but they're supposed to be trained to be able to pick out different social clues. And sometimes regular people in society are just better at it.
I think the thing that happens a lot with police is that they are trained. But, I mean, imagine if you're a police officer, most of the time you're dealing with people who have committed crimes and are motivated to lie to you about it. So police tend to come in with a bias where if they think you've committed a crime, like they are all in on that and they just want you to confess. So they can be a little bit more biased in terms of how they interpret your behaviors or the types of questions they ask you and how they elicit that type of confession. So... Yeah, that more training. But, I mean, you think about the job of a police officer. Like, they're not coming in thinking it's a 50-50 chance. Oh, maybe this is... No, they're pretty sure if they're talking to you, there's a reason why. And it's probably because you did something wrong.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. When do you bring in, like, a lie detector test? Like, or is that something that you just do not need?
So, lie detector tests, they're not admissible in court.
Oh, really?
Evidence in court. In any of like the 50 states, they are admissible in federal court, which is a whole separate thing, because they are not reliable. Yeah, so the polygraph test, it tests anxiety. And the general way it's done is I would ask you a question that would be a known lie. And it's something like, have you ever like hurt someone's feelings or something more than that? And but it's a type of thing where if you're taking a polygraph, you'd be motivated to be like, no, I haven't done that. Like, we want to this is what it looks like when you lie. And then I ask you.
Oh, they tell them to lie, or like they tell them to.
They kind of do. They tell you to tell the truth, but then they like keep asking you those types of questions until you lie.
Gotcha.
It's fundamentally flawed. And then they ask you like, well, where were you when this person got murdered? Right? Questions related to the crime, and so they can compare. Like, if you are equally as anxious, well, now that looks like a lie. It's really. It's difficult on many levels, because if you're innocent, you're going to be anxious the whole time. If you're guilty, it's not that logically hard to figure out. And so you can figure out how to be like, lie successfully. So because of those reasons, you can't actually admit into court, oh, this person failed a lie detector test. But police do use it to try to get a confession out of you.
Yeah.
So it's legal for them to have you take a polygraph, and then they can say to you, hey, you failed this polygraph. And it's also in the U.S. legal for police to lie to you. So it doesn't matter how you do in the polygraph. They can say that.
Yeah.
And if you're someone who maybe you actually did commit the crime, you're like, whatever. They got me. Now I will tell them. So now the confession gets admitted into court.
Gotcha.
Polygraphs are really, really problematic. Police will tell you that they are effective tools and that they believe in them. General recommendations is they just should not be used.
Really? That's interesting to me. What is the brain doing during a polygraph where the lines are going like this? What is that?
Yeah, so normal polygraph, it's measuring a few different things. It's measuring your heart rate. It's not actually measuring any type of brain activity.
Really? Okay.
Yeah. So
Maybe that's a common thing people think. I thought it did. I thought it was
it
like,
looks all fancy, right?
is there
You've
a
got
thing
all
in
the
your brain,
graphs.
like the lying brain thing that like, oh, there it goes?
There are companies that are starting to do that, because what we can do, like, let's say I put a bunch of electrodes on your head. There's a response, like if I showed you something that you have seen before, it's like a recognition response.
Oh, okay.
And so let's say you committed a crime. I could show you a picture of a knife, and if you recognize that knife, and that was the knife used in the crime, well, that's pretty good evidence that you were there. It's called brain fingerprinting. It's interesting, but it's new enough that it's not been allowed as evidence into a criminal court case yet.
Wow.
It's come up on like appeals, and it's been talked about. I mean, maybe 5 to 10 years, we'll start seeing that. So we can get at it that way. That do you recognize like these pictures of the crime scene? But what the polygraph does, that's just measuring your pulse rate, your heart rate, breathing, like how fast are you breathing, and how sweaty are your palms, which is just anxiety.
There must be a general thing then when you're lying that your pulse goes up or your whatever. It's nothing to do with that, really.
There's no unique physiological response
Wow.
that tells me when you're lying. I can tell when you're upset.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so we're making a lot of assumptions with it.
That's crazy. I can't believe then that they turn to that if they can't use it in court.
Right.
Was it like you said, and in the Chris Watts thing, it's actually unbelievable that he failed the polygraph, and then they said, you failed the polygraph, and that's when the tables turned, and then he brought his dad in, and then he told his dad, I killed my family.
I mean, that's totally why they use it.
Yeah.
So, it's a tool. And it is legal to be polygraphed for, like, federal security jobs. Like, if you want to go get a job working for, like, the NSA or government agencies, it's legal for them to polygraph you. It's legal for you not to be hired based on that polygraph. And there's a ton of active lawsuits around that right now, basically saying,
really,
this isn't a reliable tool. You shouldn't be using it as a hiring tool.
Interesting. So. Are your students then in your classes for this specific thing, are they going into law enforcement?
There are some law enforcement majors. So it's mostly psych majors and minors, but a lot of the law enforcement majors do pick up a psychology minor. So I usually have a few.
Interesting. What are the other students doing with this lie detection thing? What other jobs would you use that for?
Usually they're taking my psych and the law class as an elective, so they might not be taking that into a particular job. Again, a lot of government agencies might be using a polygraph. In general, I think it is helpful. For me, I teach it as like, here's a thing that we assume we know how it works. We do it, but we shouldn't, because science tells us this doesn't work. It's very basic, easy science to do. So I'm trying to teach my students, like, let's listen to what the science says in terms of how to effectively judge other people or figure out if they're lying, and maybe trust that versus just habit. Oh, we've always done it this way. It feels right.
Interesting.
So.
Yeah. Huh. What? And then we're also, one of the other things I saw on the page when I was looking at it originally was decision making. And this could be kind of going to that too as well. But framing effect was on there, and I have heard of it before, but I did some more research. Pretty much presenting two different things, and how they're presented is the way it can change the way you view that. Can you kind of describe that to people?
Sure. So it comes from, humans were fundamentally irrational. We're not logical, economics-based creatures. And so the original version of the framing effect would be like, okay, you have to, it was called like an Asian disease problem, which is just so interesting these days. Like, so imagine there's a disease, imagine.
Yeah. Yep.
And you have to pick between two different outcomes. If you pick outcome A, 60% of the people are going to live. And if you pick outcome B, well, now there's like a 1/3 chance that nobody lives and a 2/3 chance that everybody lives. So it's basically you're choosing between a certain option and an uncertain option. But you're thinking about it in terms of people living. Because I could have easily said, well, if you pick option A, 40% of people are going to die. Or if you pick option B, there's a 1/3 chance that everyone will die or a 2/3 chance that no one will die. Like I'm just using different words. It's the same exact thing.
Yeah.
But the framing effect says those words matter. If I'm talking about people living, people tend to be more willing to take that risk. Like, oh, we'll take the risk where everyone gets to live. But if I use that word die, again, same outcomes. I'm not messing with the math. The percentages are pretty straightforward.
Yep.
Now people, they're risk averse when it's that, when people are dying. So now they're more likely to be like, no, I don't want to take the risk that everyone's going to die. I'm going to go with the other one. So you see like people being, just the wording will change the way they make decisions. And it's really around like, how comfortable are you with things being uncertain? It's very easy to manipulate that based on the types of words that I use.
Yeah. Is it kind of like the thing I've heard before where let's bring money on the table. So if you have a 60% chance of winning $500,000 or you have a 10% chance of winning $1 million, people are going to pick the higher chance of winning less money because they're more comfortable with that.
Yeah, they're more likely. But if I change that as like, if you had that much to give away, like, well, now there's a 40% chance that I take that money from you.
Oh.
Now people are much more likely to be like, oh, I don't want to take the risk of losing money. You're more willing to take the risk if you can win big, but you don't want to risk losing it.
So it's not
same
in the
type of thing with money.
outcome, it's in the way that the variables are presented to the person that you're talking to.
Exactly. And so the word
Interesting.
framing effect is just referring to that presentation of how those options are. And so, yeah, you can manipulate people's decisions.
So in the psychology of decision making, then humans, we have to make decisions every single day. What are the things that change our minds when it comes to decision making, that whether it's emotion or people that in our lives or whatever, what are the things that convince us to make decisions when it comes to the brain?
Yeah, you can think about like just that fear of losing something. And in health psychology, there's a big, especially like say convincing people to like get tested for STDs or types of things where like a test could reveal something bad. That's where you really have to scare people into it. Like it's a fear-based, like that's what it's going to get, because otherwise like you don't want to do something if it could tell you something negative. But if we frame it as a screening, like we're not testing you for something negative, we're just screening you for health. Now people are much more willing to say, no, that sounds good. I'll do that. I'm a good person.
Yeah.
I want to like help other people.
Yep.
And so there is a lot of that emotion. If it sounds like you're doing a good thing to contribute to other people, we're more willing to do it. If it sounds like it could be a bad thing for us personally, we don't want to do it. It will take a lot of more like individual fear to convince us that this is a good route.
Interesting. Have you heard about, I can't think of the name of it. It's about the car. I can't think of the name. The streetcar is coming down the hill.
Yeah, the trolley problem.
The trolley problem. Is that something that you guys talk about at all?
Yeah, it's the same. It's a similar type of thing. It's that like moral conundrum of, do you let the car hit people versus other people, or are you willing to pull the lever to make it happen? Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like there should be no difference between the two scenarios, but like you actively making the decision of say who lives or who dies is a much different thing. It's another good example because, it does show, like, we are not rational people.
No.
And if it's about us and how we're going to feel and how we're going to look, that's the biggest concern for us. We can't think abstractly about what's good for humankind.
Yeah.
Which I think you see right now. Like, it's great. We want people to, stay home and be safe and wear masks and all these things. But if we need to make it like real for individuals, because even people who legitimately do care about others and groups, which is most of us, we're not all psychopaths. It's still really hard. It's hard to do things that are different and hard to do things that are difficult in the moment, because we're individual animals, right?
Yeah.
That's how we think.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up because let's just say you have a mom who is extremely for like the lockdown and everyone needs to stay inside. And she's just very into this COVID, like everyone needs to follow the rules. And then her daughter has a wedding coming up.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden she's like, well, my daughter, this is a very important moment in my daughter's life. She needs to get married and this is happening. And all of a sudden the mom is fine with having 100 people in a church or 100 people outside and no social distancing. And it's weird how our morals change when you have like a personal thing that affects your life in a way that it's almost like you throw everything out the window.
Yeah.
Like I can't believe that.
Totally.
And it happens to every one of us, but it's one of those things that's just like during this whole virus, we've really seen a lot of people's true colors and like how they actually think, because it's really affecting everyone so much mentally and physically and emotionally. It's unbelievable.
You see so much of that justification. Like, it's easy for me to say, go on social media and be like, people need to do this. But when I want to do something, well, I can justify, like, well, it's still safe for me.
Yep.
I think this is also the thing I teach about. It's one of the most powerful things we do. We want to feel like we are smart and good people.
Yeah.
So if I'm doing something where I'm like, oh, this maybe isn't the smartest or best thing that I could possibly doing, odds are I'm going to figure out how to justify it. I'm going to come up with a way to say, like, no, actually, here's why everything I'm doing is the best thing to do. And all these other people are wrong. It's very hard to say, oh, I'm wrong or I'm not making the best choices. And we will do literally anything to avoid that.
Is it a sociopathic tendency or what is that?
It's a human tendency. It's human. Honestly, so it's this idea that we want to feel good about ourselves.
Yep.
And literally, if you see someone who doesn't show that, where they're like comfortable feeling bad about themselves, in many ways, that's almost a sign of like clinical depression, right? Like just normal humanness is we want to feel like we're making good, smart decisions, and we will jump through a ton of hoops to justify it. Now, like say like a sociopath might take that further and be more willing to hurt people. Usually for most people at some point, like hypocrisy will kick in. You'll be like, okay, no, I will change my behavior. You won't feel good about it, but you'll still do it. But yeah, there are some extremes where people just do whatever they want to without regard for others.
Yeah.
The whole time.
Interesting. And I'm glad we brought that up because you see right now there are people, I don't know if you've seen the videos, but you have these people going into stores or whatever, refusing to wear a mask, refusing to follow the rules. And it's one of those things where I don't think anyone wants to. You know, everyone wants life to go back to normal, but it's one of those things where this is the circumstance. What emotions are in play there where they feel like that? Like, what are these things that are going on where they're like, I'm not wearing a mask. Like, this is the end of the world. Like, government can't control me. Is it what's going on where people just feel like that? There's got to be something.
It's if their identity is caught up in like affiliating with, say, like political or social groups where what they're saying is the virus is a hoax and you don't need masks and you don't need to do this and your personal liberty is important. And if that's your identity, you want to do things that like affirm this group identity, especially if you're feeling threatened.
Yeah.
Like when people are feeling threatened, they're most at risk for that type of like kind of selfish behavior for like, no, I need to show what type of person I am.
Yeah.
Which is why I think it's problematic that this has been so politicized, because it gives people, if that's their political identity, an option to be like, this is who I am. I'm causing a ruckus in Menards because I don't think I should wear a mask.
It's weird how it's happening at Menards so often.
I know, it's like it's ridiculous, but it's really about them like showing this is what I believe in. These are the groups of people I belong to. And so I think there's benefit in, you see some of the messaging where it's like, we all need to come together and this is all of us working together. If you can get people to think about being a part of a bigger group and helping each other, hopefully that should cut down on that type of behavior. So, but a lot of it is they're trying to show what political or social group they affiliate with. and they're just doing it in a really visible and obnoxious way.
Yeah, I think they feel ostracized by the media and by pretty much anybody else that's following the rules, and so they get this idea that they're gonna make a stand.
Yeah.
I'm going to Menards.
Well, and they get, I mean, in their forum, they get support for that. They get people saying, yeah, you do that. That's right. And so that only is building up their sense that they're making the right choice.
Yeah, and you see that so much nowadays with everything going on where it's like social media. We haven't gotten to that yet at all. Plays such a big key factor in everything we're doing. You see all these things on there, whether it's real or fake, because there's so much of both. And you almost play into it, and you get. I find myself getting mad about stuff all the time. I see it. I'm like, is this real? Is that fake? I don't know. I need to look it up. Like, and then you're like, why are you caring so much about what other people think on Facebook? And then it comes to play in your own life, and you're like, wow, I can't believe that affected me that much.
Can't believe I wasted that 10 minutes.
Yeah.
10 minutes? That's all you spend on Facebook? I mean, my gosh.
Yeah. 10 minutes on one post,
Okay,
maybe.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, they're very effectively designed to tap into that need to connect with other people and see what other people are thinking and what they're saying about you, if they're liking or responding or retweeting your stuff. I mean, they're building that brain chemistry that we have to connect with other people. But it does set up, this weird echo chamber where you don't have to listen to people who are different from you. And if you do, you can like very easily negate that or argue with them or troll them. So, I mean, I love social media, but
I do
gosh,
too, yeah.
it is just the negatives of it. It's built to
crazy.
manipulate us.
It's been a rough year.
It has
for the
been.
social media.
Right? Yeah.
Is our brain doing something when? Because I know, like, the younger generation, I mean, I shouldn't even be talking. We're young, too. But, like, likes and comments and stuff like that, is it doing something to us that people have become literally addicted? What is the brain doing when social media and you're getting these likes and these comments? What is going on?
So I think there's some evidence that does show that. So it's the dopamine neurotransmitter in your brain, and that is what signals reward. So dopamine is like, say, heroin. A lot of addictive drugs are also working with that dopamine network. And it's what, you get your paycheck. That's dopamine. Your brain will literally release dopamine. It tells you when something feels good and is rewarding. And so there's evidence that when you get likes on a Facebook post or, responses to a tweet, whatever social media you're using, that as you use social media, it doesn't take long before your brain is also literally releasing more dopamine in response to that.
Wow.
Because, and the way I teach it, we humans, we're fundamentally social creatures. Our whole goal in life is to form connections with other people.
Yep.
And that's what social media is playing on. Like, it's very easy for me to see, like, oh, people like this. They like my posts and my ideas. And so, of course, my brain thinks that's rewarding.
Yeah.
And we'll do things to seek that out more. So, no, it really is literally, it is affecting our brain chemistry
I can't believe
to respond to that as a reward.
It is crazy.
Literally, the chemical that is released from drugs is, they've proven this or they've looking into it, that social media.
I'm very sure there are studies that show like more activity in the dopamine network
That's
with social media
unbelievable.
use. So
It's literally addicting. Then it is. There's no arguing with it when people say social media is addicting.
Well, and so you could if we're gonna define addicting, okay,
Yeah.
like you need to have withdrawal. Like some people argue, if you don't have physical withdrawal symptoms from it, then it's not. It might not be a physical addiction. It might be psychological addiction. It's a whole complex area to get into. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty darn close, and it would be interesting, to talk to people. I can't talk. I've not been one of those people who've been like, I'm taking a month off social media.
Yeah.
I cannot. I mean, there might literally be physical withdrawal symptoms if you don't have that daily interaction response. So, I don't think it's unreasonable to start thinking about this as an addiction.
No. Take a phone away from a 15-year-old.
Right? Yeah.
See what happens.
The worst you can
for
do.
a week.
The worst.
For a week. They're going to be like, I don't know what to do. I don't know who to talk to.
I don't know who I am
It's
anymore.
crazy how times have changed with technology and everything. And it really does play a big effect on our social lives, like you mentioned, because it's almost like people can't have a conversation anymore. Some people can't because they're so used to, talking online or whatever. They're not used to being real with people in person when they can just say whatever they want behind their back and there's no connection there with a physical person. It's just, you can literally, maybe that's why bullying has gone up so much, because you can literally say whatever you want on the internet and then you don't have to deal with the repercussions really of dealing with that person in person.
Yeah.
So I it's just crazy to me to see all the younger generation deal with everything, and then you throw in social media on top of that.
Yeah, I tell my students at least once a month how glad I am that I didn't have to deal with social media until I was an adult. I can't imagine growing up with that. And I mean, schools are, how do you deal with online bullying policies and compare that to people's freedom of speech and being able to prove what's happening? But yeah, it's so easy to dehumanize people when they're not right in front of you.
Yep.
It's easy to just post or to assume that what someone is posting is reflective of who they really are as a person, and that's not always the case either.
Oh no, yeah, and people change and things change about people. Obviously that's one of the worst parts about social media is you could have made a bad mistake, and I think we're really going to see this in the future. But when people are younger and they're dumb, they say stuff on social media, then they go get a job 15 years later. Companies are going back looking through social media, and they might have said something inappropriate. And now they find themselves not able to get a job because it's whatever year, and it's impossible because you made some horrible comments on social media.
I've seen some really interesting articles about younger women running for political office where they may have had nudes on social media at some point.
Ooh.
Or they're out there, and it's like, I'm not even pointing out that it's a problem. Like, whatever, who cares? But you can't have, 40, 50, 60-year-old people being like, you shared a nude. It's like, this is what happened, And so the idea that if we're
crazy to think though,
if we want to encourage 20 and 30-year-olds to get involved in political office, we have to be aware that we might be able to go back 20 years and find a stupid tweet you sent.
Yep.
And that can't be a complete deal breaker.
No.
We have to give people that grace to realize they can grow and change.
Or
just realize my standards for what I think is appropriate are not necessarily the same as my students.
Oh
that's
yeah,
fine.
100%. Yeah, it's actually funny that you say that because you could have a Supreme Court justice in the future who had an OnlyFans.
I would assume so. That's where it's going to be at. And that cannot be a problem.
That can't be.
That's going to be most of them.
No, exactly. That can't be the make it or break it. Did they have an OnlyFans when they were a younger girl?
Yeah.
That's
crazy.
When
you think about that, that's going to be interesting.
It is. The future as technology progresses, and I'm sure we're going to get into even deeper waters with technology companies are always looking for the ways to drag us in and get us in deeper. So it's only going to get worse. I can only imagine.
Oh, yeah. I mean, they have hired, and that is sometimes people think psychology, you're only going into treatment or clinical psych. There's a lot of scientific experimental psychologists who are working at social media companies because they want to design it in a way that encourages engagement with the app. And one interesting one, and this is older, but even just Pinterest is set up so that you can never, there's always going to be something that you can half see. However you're looking at Pinterest, on your computer, on your phone, on a tablet, it's staggered, right? If you are imagining it. So there's only going to be something that you have to just keep scrolling a little bit to see all of it.
Wow.
And it's basically designed purposefully to get you just to keep going.
That's crazy.
You never feel like you're at the end of it.
Yep.
And so, those little types of things, I mean, those are great jobs for some of my students. So they're very much focused on how do we manipulate people's natural tendencies as humans to get them to keep engaging with this app in ways that might not be good for them.
That's crazy to even think of. I never even thought about putting the psychology into other jobs. I mean, if you think about it, everything that we do is based on the psychological aspect. And
tons, yeah.
You could put it in any job, really. I mean, you could really... I bet you have students who are taking your classes that'll go into all different backgrounds, and they'll find use for psychological studies. I would.
It really
imagine.
is. Yeah, I tell students you're gonna have to work with people in any type of job. So at the very basis, learning a little bit about how people and how they work is gonna help you. There's tons of interesting stuff on grocery stores, right? Pumping the smell of baking bread through a grocery store, it makes you happy, it makes you a little hungry, it makes you more likely to buy things. And where you place stuff, you want to put, at eye level is where you want to put your most expensive things. So if you walk through and you look for where are the discount brands, they tend to be at the very top or bottom because you want people to work a little bit harder to find them. The most expensive stuff will be on the end caps. So I mean, there's a
Wow.
ton of very precise psychological research that goes into like exactly why
crazy.
stores are laid out the way they are.
And they're looking at what we're doing when we're going into the grocery store, where we go first. Because I'm
yeah.
sure the aisles are all lined up about what you need and where.
Well, there's a reason why produce is over here and then like milk is all the way over here. They like, what are the two common things people are coming in to buy? We're going to put them as far away from each other as possible.
So you got to walk throughout the whole store.
So you got to pick up maybe one more thing, right?
Wow.
And it works.
That's
yeah.
unbelievable. Where is it? Is it at bars or it's either bars or casinos where it's about the temperature that they're using and it's all about keeping people there or getting people out quick? It's one I can't remember.
Restaurants.
Is it
for
restaurants keep them up?
temperature? I thought.
I thought they kept it a little colder so they can cycle
So they
through.
keep rotating tables. Casinos, I mean, that's really what got me into this area of psychology because I went to college up in the Twin Cities and we would go like to Treasure Island Casino because it's a place where if not everyone was 21, you could still all get in.
Yeah.
But I just remember being amazed at how there's no clocks. All the rooms kind of look the same. It's easy to get lost, and it sounds like everyone's winning constantly. Like, if you ever listen to a slot machine when no one's playing it, like, it's still making ding, 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 and, like, coin sounds.
Wow.
And it's just, like, it's so obviously manipulative, but it just makes you feel like it works. You're going to wander through. You don't need to leave. You don't need to know what time it is. You just need to like stay there.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
No clocks. I never even thought about that. They don't want you to know how long you've been there
No, they
for.
don't want you to know. They don't want you to know where you are or what's happening. It's very disorienting.
I've also heard that casinos, I don't know if it's called reoxidizing air or something. It's about keeping you awake and alive. They pump.
Oh gosh, they put more.
They suck the air out. They like they infuse more oxygen and then they pump it back into the casino. So you're like, woo, I'm ready to gamble.
I wouldn't put it past them.
And then you
That
get the
sounds
free
right.
drinks, unlimited free drinks.
Yeah. They want to make it so easy for you just to sit there and keep giving them money.
Yeah. What other aspects of life are they doing? Do you know any other examples? Because this is really interesting to me where they're doing this kind of stuff to get more money out of you.
I mean, there's a lot of work on like how things are priced. So, like, let's say going back to a restaurant, like if they're offering you, like it's smart for them to have, you want to have like this super expensive steak, but you want to assume no one's going to buy this super expensive thing. So if you have one thing that might be a lot cheaper for you to make, but you make that only a little less expensive, that's what people are going to buy. 'Cause they're going to be like, well, I can't do the big thing, but I don't want to look cheap. I'm going to get the next thing.
Yep.
And that's where you put your like biggest margin, where you're making a ton of money, but you're not spending money on doing that. Or same thing with like wine lists. Like the next most expensive wine
Really?
might be one of the cheapest bottles for that restaurant to buy.
That's crazy.
Yeah, but they're like, no, like you're not going to go in and buy the most expensive wine. Some people might, but most people aren't. You're not going to buy the cheapest. But somewhere in between, that's where they know they've got you. And so that's where they put the stuff that they can make the most money on. So, I mean, any situation where people have control over pricing, there's a lot of that, like, psychology manipulation.
Have you ever heard of companies? We did a podcast on this a while ago about companies putting, like, sexual things in logos, in advertising.
Subliminal type of stuff?
Subliminal messaging.
There's not a lot of evidence that subliminal messaging works.
Oh, really?
I mean, like, I could show... If I'm like showing you images, I could put in like a subliminal happy face and that could raise your mood, right? Like, so our brains can perceive stuff that's presented out of consciousness subliminally.
Yeah.
And that can affect our basic mood. So yeah, some companies may have done that, but there's no evidence that it actually leads to you buying something.
Really?
Like that's a little bit more complex a behavior. So yeah, that does happen. But it's not a huge factor in like actual like consumer behavior. Is that subliminal marketing?
We were literally looking at all these different ones, and I didn't know. I guess I had
they
no
start
idea.
pulling it out like, oh, and you look at it this way.
Yeah. Well, it was like Disney stuff. Like they were putting like
the Little Mermaid.
like
the
oh
giant
yeah, there was
penis
all
and
these different
that.
exactly all these weird things, and like Pepsi literally had one that if you put them together it said like sex or whatever, and it's like. Are people looking into it too deep, or is this actually?
No, they are 100% looking into it too deep. They want to see like patterns and things. And so some of that maybe was not even like purposeful.
Yep.
You know, you start examining everything, you're gonna find some fun stuff, and there's no evidence that's actually gonna influence anything you do.
Yeah,
it might have a momentary influence on your mood.
everyone's looking for a conspiracy theory.
Right, yeah, that's a very exciting one.
That's
So,
what it
yeah,
is. It's like
yeah.
one of those things where everything that is happening in life, there are people looking for conspiracy theories, and this is a good transition into the paranormal.
Sure.
Because you were telling me about this, and I've always thought that, because I'm very skeptical about ghosts and everything, but I've always thought that there might be something where our brains want to see a ghost, and so there's going to be a ghost, or there's
Yes.
going to be some weird thing going on, a creak in the night. Could it be a ghost? Like, I don't. What have you found about this?
So many things. For one thing, we evolved to be pattern-seeking creatures. There's like a TED Talk where I'm stealing that line from. And the idea, like, you could think about early humans as, well, we need to know when to plant, when to harvest, like figuring out weather patterns is helpful. And so our brains are really good at picking up patterns. But it's overdetermined. So that's why people are superstitious, right? We think we do something and something else happens. We're seeing patterns where it's just coincidence. Same thing with like casinos, right? We think, oh, if I just one more time, I'm going to win. No, there's no pattern. It's random. And so if you think about like astrology and horoscopes, that explains a lot of that. People think, oh, this maps onto pieces of my life, but you're putting a pattern there where there is no pattern.
Yeah.
So that's one explanation for it. And then a lot of times, there have been actual studies done on people who claim to have been abducted by aliens. Everyone who claims to have been abducted by aliens believes that being abducted by aliens is a thing that can happen to them.
Yeah.
Right? And so if you already think that's an option, it's like your brain is putting that as an explanation for you have a weird sleep disorder, sleep paralysis. I mean, whenever you're waking up or falling asleep, we can be prone to weird types of hallucinations and things. That's the normal functioning of our brain. But if you think aliens are real and that makes sense, you're going to interpret your weird random experience as, oh no, this was aliens. This was a thing.
Huh. So you'd have to find somebody that didn't believe in alien abduction, and then something weird happened to them, and that would be a backup for it, or what would that be?
Right, yeah. If you found that person, then that might be good evidence that there might actually be aliens,
Yeah.
but that person does not exist.
Yeah.
The people who are all in on alien abduction
Yep.
believed in it. Like, they tend to be more just like new agey. They have documented history of those types of beliefs before their so-called abduction experience.
Interesting. It is weird because the people that believe in ghosts always see ghosts. And the people that don't, like, I don't really believe, Colin, you don't really believe. We've gone all over the place, never seen anything. And it's one of those things, like, we even had a conversation a couple of podcasts ago, like, are some people just ghost seers and we're not? Like, it's not a scientific approach.
No,
but
I mean, if you, like, we want explanation. We want to
Yeah.
feel that, like, life isn't random, but that things make sense. And so if you believe in ghosts, then that makes sense as an explanation for you as stuff that you experience. But, I mean, that's coming from your belief. It's not coming from, like, the reality of the experience. And so, like you said, like, someone who doesn't believe in ghosts could have the same type of weird experience, and they're much more likely to be like, oh, that was random, or oh, I was falling asleep,
Yeah.
or oh, like,
Yeah.
you're a little bit more open to realizing that random stuff just happens.
Yeah.
You don't have to, like, have that explanation for it.
Ethan, I feel like we've tried so hard to see them.
Oh, 100%.
Try
I'm
to
surprised we
hear
haven't.
something or anything.
I'm surprised we haven't, like, actually tricked our own brains. Have they found anything in people that are really, like, paranormal, or they think that whatever? Have they found anything in their minds that is doing that? Is it a psychological disorder? What's because you got to think that these people believe it. They 100%
Oh,
believe
yeah.
it. You know, they've almost convinced themselves, and I don't want to denounce anyone that thinks, because we've had a lot of them on. I just personally haven't. I'm wondering what is going on there,
I don't think there's anything, like, fundamentally different in how their brain works. I mean, the key is what you're saying is that they believe it. And so we see things that line up with our beliefs. It's called top-down processing. You have a belief in your brain. You have sensory information coming in.
Yeah.
You're going to interpret that sensory information in line with your beliefs and expectations. So if you expect ghosts, that's going to make sense to you as, oh, that's a way to see it. If you don't expect ghosts, then that's not going to be, like, the context your brain puts on your experiences.
That's
So
interesting.
it's more like their brains are working just as normal as anyone else's brain. It's just putting that paranormal ghost context.
Yeah.
And if that's what you talk about and that's what you think about and that's what you believe in, you're going to put that on a lot of experiences.
That's crazy. So it's almost as if they never had the knowledge when they grew up or anything about ghosts, and then weird things started happening to them, or you assume they're weird, they would never actually put the blame on paranormal.
It's pretty rare to find like a committed skeptic who then has like that 180 degree where they're accepting a paranormal explanation for something. That generally the people who are really pushing paranormal explanations or, you know, on those ghost hunter shows, they already believe in it.
Mm-hmm.
Even if they might claim they're taking a skeptical approach, if they're coming from that position of belief, again, they're just human. They can never let that bias go completely.
Yeah.
So they're always going to lean towards that type of explanation.
Well, and then they get the equipment out and they get all the different thing. I don't know how much about the equipment you know, but there's like
There's like
the radio thing
the
that goes
frequency. I know I did a ghost
The
hunting
box.
thing
The
at
box.
The Renaissance Festival grounds.
Oh, really?
One time, yeah, it was fun. I mean, it was ridiculous, and but it was totally the type of thing. So it's like it's picking up frequencies. It's just static.
Yep.
If you want to sit there and think you hear the name Molly being said in
Oh,
it,
we've done it before. We've had the
right?
guy
And
on
you're
here.
like, oh my gosh, he said that.
yeah.
But then someone else is like, no, it didn't. Like, what? So, I mean, and so that's a great example because
Yeah.
it's that like very ambiguous type of stimuli where you could put any type of interpretation on
Oh,
that. And so, yeah, you do see some people being like, oh, I know that's exactly what they said.
Yeah.
And it is fun, like, yeah, when it's recorded and other people are like, I didn't hear that at all. But same thing, like once someone says like, no, I heard it say this, I heard it say Ashley. Now you can only hear that. So like once that's in your brain, now you're like, well, now I think that's what it's saying too. So
What is that called, or what is there a scientific thing for that? Where when someone else recommends it, that that's what it is. Like, what is that called?
I don't know if there's a name for it. It's the same type of thing where like once you have like an expectation, like now your brain is locked onto that and hearing that. Like it reminds me of the same like whatever the dress was, like, are you seeing it as white and gold? Are you seeing it
not the
the black and blue or
whatever?
gray and gold?
Yeah, or there was like an audio one too. Are you hearing them say this?
Laurel or
Yeah, right. And then once you think
Laurel
you know
and
it, like
Yanny.
you could Laurel and Yanny, and then
Yeah.
you only hear it one way. But then if you take a break and you come back and hear it the other way,
Yep.
you'll be convinced it was two different like sound files.
That's crazy.
Right, and it's just yeah, those are great examples. Whatever your brain expects is oftentimes what you will like experience. And it really shows you how much of our daily experiences is coming from what's in my brain, not from like what's actually happening around me.
It just blows me away that the paranormal people, you know, they bring out all this stuff, and then it's almost as if like there's when we've had them on, it's almost as like there's a switch. I don't know what it is, what mental thing they're doing, like Jedi mind tricks here, but like it's like we are hearing the things they're talking about.
Yeah, totally.
And like we even went on like this paranormal thing with this guy, and it's like my friend got tapped on the shoulder. It's like, did you really get tapped on the shoulder? Because I got tapped on the shoulder. It's like your body is playing tricks on you.
Totally.
Big time.
Yeah.
And
no, it's interesting. Yeah. and if you weren't a skeptical, critical thinker, that it can be very persuasive. Like, no, I did feel something weird. And if you don't really realize how much of that could just be created by your own brain and not necessarily by external stuff.
Yeah.
You know, it does. You can
Is it
understand
is it hypnosis, or does it get into that level?
Not really. I mean, it's hypnosis is kind of a weird thing. Like some people can be more suggestible.
That's what I've wondered. How does that work?
You can't. People who don't believe in hypnosis, it's really hard to hypnotize them. So some people argue that so that means it's not real. But I mean, we're really suggestible and open to influence. And so if you believe in it and you believe that you can be put in that state, you can put people into a state where they don't necessarily remember things, or they're really open to influence. It's actually, it's a weird thing because it's not necessarily a totally different state of consciousness. It does affect people. It's an effective pain relief.
Really?
I mean, there are dentists who use hypnosis to help reduce pain and anxiety around dentist. In many ways, that's what Lamaze is for like women going through childbirth. It's a way of focusing on your breathing that almost like knocks you out of what's really happening to almost like a self-induced like hypnotic type of state. So
wow.
I mean, it is very effective for pain relief, which tells you there's something there. I mean, people can do surgery under hypnosis.
I never knew about this before. How did they get him under it? How did they get him onto it? Is it just breathing?
I mean, I think like a lot of the initial ones are more of the like you're feeling sleepy, you're going into a trance type of stuff. You won't. But if I tell you you're not going to experience pain, like you won't experience pain.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow. What is the? I keep asking this. What is the mind doing that would shut off the pain thing?
There's a
whatever
lot,
the pain thing is.
The brain can override those pain. Like, so we have neurons in our skin that tell us when we're experiencing pain. Which is, and there are people who like, if they don't have that, they're at risk of like really hurting themselves badly. Pain is helpful. It tells me like, stop doing something.
Yeah.
But our brain is able to override that and shut that off in kind of interesting ways. Like I'm pointing at the back of my head here because it's called like the spinal gate theory of pain. Like it can send a signal to almost like shut down those neurons at the spinal cord where it doesn't communicate that to the brain. Anyone who's run a marathon has probably experienced that because like that release of endorphins, I mean, that's physically hard on your body, but people who run long distances, like your knees will hurt, your ankles will hurt, everything sucks. And then it'll get to a point where it won't hurt at all.
Wow.
And that's both the brain releasing neurotransmitters and it's shutting down that physical experience of pain for you.
Huh. It's almost like soldiers getting shot.
Right, yeah. And so, yeah, or people who have been in those types of traumatic situations who have gotten hurt but have still had to overcome that for a short period of time. It won't last forever. But yeah, it's certainly something we can ignore pain for some amount of time because it is very psychological.
Our bodies are a lot more powerful than people think.
Our brains are.
Our brains.
Yes,
brains,
our
yeah.
brains are.
Yeah.
I mean, our bodies are great, but yeah, the brains are more powerful.
I've heard that there are limiters on our brains that where we actually can lift a lot more than we think we can and we can do a lot more than we think we can, but our brain tells us to stop, like you said, because you can hurt yourself. But some people are able to ignore, I mean, this is kind of what you just said, ignore that and like really push themselves, like the mom whose son is underneath a car.
Can do feats of, I mean, yeah, those are
Crazy
things.
stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know if it's, like, I don't know if you can consciously decide to do it or if you have to be in like an emotional extreme. It's not true that we only use 10% of our brain. So it's not like, oh, some people are tapping into extra brain power. It's more just, yeah, like you can like you have a lot of perceptions of maybe how strong you are, what you can do. And you can absolutely override that. And that's a big part of like distance running training is actually like you need to stop telling yourself when it hurts or when you're tired because all you need to do is override that mentally and all of a sudden you're physically capable of doing a lot more.
That's crazy.
That's where the quote came in. It's all mental.
It is all mental. I mean, from what we're hearing here, it's all mental. Like
It really
if you
is,
tell your
yeah.
body you can keep going, you probably can. I mean, at some point you're probably gonna pass out.
Yeah, you can physically hurt yourself pretty bad doing
Oh,
that.
yeah.
Or like those ultra marathoners where they're running like 100 miles. I mean, that is a mental.
Unbelievable.
Obviously, there's some physical training, but it's a lot more of the mental training that's allowing them to do that.
Or like
Yeah.
the people that do like the holding their breath competitions.
Yeah, those types of things. Yeah, like any of those like physical extremes, it's really just a mental game.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's great. And one other thing I wanted to ask you about is, so you were talking about going to some paranormal
Yeah.
places. So you went to, where was it again? The
It's-
prison?
Yeah, the Ohio State Reformatory, which is an old prison. It was built in the 1890s in Ohio. It was a prison until about the 1950s. It's known as the site where Shawshank Redemption was filmed. So people have seen that movie like pretty much the entirety of the movie was filmed there. But it's a notable paranormal spot.
And
in
so
the
you were on a
US.
ghost tour, or was it just a...
I wasn't. I just did a self tour.
Okay.
They do ghost tours. They're not doing them now during COVID because they're not doing any type of group tours.
Yeah.
But, I mean, it's a big spooky building.
I was going to
That's
ask
for
you
sure.
if you were on that, if there were other people freaking out. But when you were there, did you notice anything weird or...
No, I mean, so if you've ever been inside a prison, like imagine like this is 6 stories of cells. Like, so it's a big open room. And so one side has like 6 rows of cells and then it's all open on the outside, right? And it's all built of steel. It's super old. It's not great ventilation. So on just like your regular windy day, the amount of like air that might be like sneaking in through the windows and ducts, like it's constantly creaking and weird, right? Like there's so many sounds that you could interpret as like, this is this. There's so many windows where, there might be light coming in and, weird angles or things.
Yep.
So no, I did not see anything that I couldn't explain that way.
Yeah.
But it's certainly the place where there's a lot of like weird sensory stuff happening and it just feels spooky anyways.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. Well, even
yeah.
the way you describe the building to us right now, you're talking about it in a very scientific, the light, the wind, where if you get a paranormal person in there, it's like,
Yeah, it's cold right here, so that's the
Yeah,
ghost.
yeah.
It's like, no,
It's just
it's
I'm
the
seeing
vent. Yeah.
I'm 100%. It's all making sense now. The difference between somebody that is looking at it in more of a paranormal or someone that's looking at it in a more scientific.
Yeah.
And maybe there's a middle ground. I don't know. I have no idea if there's any scientific.
Either maybe we're the middle ground.
There's a lot of scientists who have tried to scientifically test, especially for ESP, like back in the realm of more psychology. Like that's your parapsychology. Can you read minds? Can you pick up on what I'm thinking? So many scientific tests for that and no concrete evidence of it. And so there are people who really are committed to like, well, let's demonstrate. Let's set up a controlled experiment to look for this. It's hard with like the haunted house because like what's your control?
Yeah.
You know, you go in there with the like radio frequency thing. It's
Yeah.
just very individual. What are you hearing from
Yeah.
that? So that's a little bit harder. That's a little bit more like whatever you think you experiences.
Now
What do you think?
ESP, the mind reading thing. That's an interesting. What does ESP stand for?
Extrasensory perception.
So what are they doing when they're mind reading, or what is the thing
So
there?
the idea would be like anything that I know, I have to know from my senses. I either saw it, I heard it, I touched it, right? Like,
Yep.
and if you think about all your knowledge, you know, probably mostly you read it or you heard it, but
Yeah.
anything you know comes from your senses. So ESP would be like, well, what if you know something that didn't come from your senses? Like if I'm thinking of something and then you know it, well, now, okay, you didn't see that, you didn't hear it, right? So that would be extrasensory. So, and then there's like different categories of like, well, maybe you can pick up on what I'm thinking. Maybe you can move something with your brain. That would be another type of it. Maybe maybe if I look at something, like if I'm looking at a card and now you can pick up on that, like you're picking up on my senses, you know, like so there's a lot of different types of things. Maybe you can sense when people are looking at you,
Interesting.
you know.
But they've never been able to prove it.
No. I would say no.
Interesting.
You can't get a degree in parapsychology anymore
Yeah.
in the United States. I think you might still be able to in Scotland. Like there were a couple places where you could get that like degree in parapsychology. And some of those people would say, yes, there is some evidence. More skeptical scientists who looked at those studies have said these are poorly conducted studies.
Yeah.
And any study has a chance, like life is random, there's always room for random error.
Yep.
So you have to be able to repeat your findings, and that's where it usually falls apart.
Parapsychology is paranormal psychology.
Yeah, basically. It's like psychology outside the normal. So it's
Okay.
a lot of that study of ESP.
Interesting. We had a psychic on
That would be
last year.
parapsychology.
And
Yeah.
and she you know, very nice lady, but just in the thing where she was talking about knowing, it was a knowing things about people without knowing them, but it was very vague things that you know, I don't know, I would never go to a psychic, but people are all in on that. Like people are 100% all in. Like you need to go. One of my friends just said you need to go see a psychic. I'm like, I don't know about that. I don't know about that.
People who do that, like they're really good at what's called cold reading, which would be, and it's really difficult to do because it's like I think for most normal people, or at least me, if I'm having a conversation, like I'm a little more focused on like me sounding good. It's hard to pay equal attention to what the other person is doing. But you can tell like when might they get fidgety, how might they respond to different topics, do they have like anything visible in their clothing or tattoos or anything about them where I could like figure out, oh, are you military or this or that, you know, that type of thing.
Yep.
And so cold reading is just me looking at you and figuring out stuff that can be close. And then if I say something and you like start nodding, your eyes get really big, well then I know I'm on the right track. Hot reading is if you book an appointment with me from an hour from now and I do a deep internet dive to find out everything I can about you.
Yep.
And so that's why I like people who say they are psychic and who are like taking your money to do that type of thing. You can't accidentally cold read someone. Like if you're not really focused on like figuring out stuff about them, you cannot do it. And so I think they're a little disingenuous. Like they are very much focused on figuring out what other people are bringing. They might claim that they are intuitively picking up on stuff about you, but again, there's never been anyone this is great to shout out to James Randi, who is an amazing magician. He just died at like age 96 or 98
Really?
in the last month. But he, in the 1960s, had like $1 million prize. It was part of his James Randi Foundation for anyone who could demonstrate any evidence of psychic activity under controlled conditions.
Really?
He showed up at his office, he'd do the test. No one ever claimed the prize.
Wow.
And he was known for, like, he's great to look up, James Randi.
I'll have to check that out.
R-A-N-D-I. Like, he was on, like, Johnny Carson, but, like, he was the type of asshole who would, like, expose. Uri Geller was known for spoon bending. And, like, people who would be on there as psychics, like, Randi was, like, just would tear you apart.
Wow.
From a point of view, he's like, you're manipulating vulnerable people. What are you doing?
Yeah.
And would do it in such an entertaining way.
Huh.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that out. That's interesting.
Magicians have a long history of like doing paranormal debunking. Some magicians know how to fool people.
Oh, yeah.
And they know how easy
Yeah.
it is. And so they're very good at being like, well, here's exactly what they're doing, you know? So
Yeah. And the other thing is, like, I'm glad you brought up being a psychic nowadays, because social media, you can pretty much figure out everything about, not everything, but you can figure
Almost
out
everything.
It seems like a lot of things, their interest, their family, because everyone's got Facebook with the pictures of everybody.
It's so, yeah, you could find so much information
Uh-huh.
and certainly enough to like make some logical guesses.
Yep.
And then half the time it's the person telling you stuff. Or like you said, you're making vague statements where it's like, well, you're unsure about something in your life. And then you just kind of sit quietly and let the person talk, and then you can play with that a little bit more.
Yeah.
So.
Huh, that's interesting. That there is a guy who put all this money out and no one came forward. It's almost like, well, if there was real psychics,
Right?
where are
Yeah.
you?
Yeah, why not?
It's like the
show it.
American
Yeah.
Idol of psychics.
Like, let us figure out what you're doing. But
Yeah.
no,
Huh.
it's
That's
not.
crazy.
Yeah.
What other fields into psychology are you interested in besides the things we've talked about? Because I know there's so much.
There is a lot. And so, I mean, I teach social psychology, which is a really broad area. A big part of social psych is like prejudice and stereotyping discrimination. It's now especially because I taught it this summer, like right after some of the George Floyd protests
Yeah.
began. And so I think it's really interesting, especially nowadays, to talk about you know, what is the state of like racial tensions in the United States? How do people like truly understand what racism is, especially people who are white and maybe don't have like immediate experience interacting with people of different races or ethnicities. And so that's interesting. I think to me it's interesting because it's important. I feel like having conversations and talking about that is a way to reduce it. I don't have a lot of time for the whole like, oh, talking about race just makes it worse. It's like, no.
Yeah.
First of all, talk to any non-white person and they also will generally shut that down. So so that's an area I'm interested in. It's central to my field. And I also, like, again, social psych is a big area. I'm interested specifically also in teaching and learning just as a professor, especially now with so many things being moved online.
Yeah.
How do you motivate student learning? Like, I have to realize that me standing in front of my students talking is maybe that never mattered as much as I would like to think so. Like, how are other ways I can get them to really learn and experience this information? They don't have to sit through 2 hours of lectures every week and read 4 chapters. And when, like, just a general number is you maybe remember 30% of that a month later. It's like, okay, well, let's cut all the fluff. What's the thing that I want you to take home?
Yeah.
So I'm interested in studying that.
Yeah.
Just to improve me as a professor and a teacher and hopefully improve my students' lives. And
I was going to ask you about that because being a professor right now with everything going on has got to be extremely challenging. Connecting, not even connecting, but getting out the information, keeping them on board with it. What are the changes that you've had to make, or do you still have in-person classes?
Right now I'm on sabbatical this fall, which means I'm not teaching classes right now. I will be back in the spring. And I did teach both this past summer and then also last spring when we moved online.
Yep.
I have done some online teaching and it is harder just because, I don't have that connection with students. I like talking in front of students and then they can ask a question and then we think of something else. I like having those discussions. It's harder to do that online. I don't love like synchronous online. I don't want all my students looking at me on Zoom. I mean, everyone's just, doing 8 other things while they're in class. Like that's not worth my time or theirs to do that. So I think you can set up. The nice thing about being online though is that, and when I'm getting ready for spring, is I'm being very intentional. Like I'm cutting my lectures down. I'm cutting the reading down, but I can bring in like, hey, check out this YouTube video. Here's a documentary. Here's this piece to read. So I think it's easier to bring in a lot of other things, give students options of what to look at, and then they can have generally students like that choice where they read, pick these things and then tell me what you read and what you thought about them.
Yeah.
Then forcing them to like sit through a whole bunch of stuff.
Yeah.
So
I couldn't do it. I couldn't do the online. I wouldn't be able to. I'm such a visual, like I need to be there. I need to like be a part of it.
it's hard to motivate yourself when, especially now. But even just in general with online stuff, you have to be a lot more self-motivated and organized just to know what's happening. Because you don't have that going to class twice a week where the professor will remind you, like, hey, don't forget, your paper's due. So I see a lot of students struggle with it. And it's like, I get it. This is not... And when I try to tell them, like, you're building skills that will help you. One day you'll be grateful that maybe you did have to figure out how do you organize your assignments or how do you motivate yourself to do stuff you don't want to do.
Yeah.
Like, sadly, that this will not be the last time you have to do that.
No,
So,
yeah. And hopefully they get a vaccine here soon so that this is over.
Yeah, I mean,
'cause
I
it's
think,
crazy.
we will get through this and look back on it as...
We've got through everything else.
I was going to say,
through it.
2020 has been
It's
a hell of a
almost
year.
Done. It can't get worse, right?
Hopefully not. So I want to thank you so much for coming on here, Emily. This has been awesome.
Yeah,
We
thank you guys. This
covered
was
a
fun.
lot. We covered a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And I don't know if you have any things on your social media or anything, or if people want to do more digging. We always usually put a guest or a link for our guest on there if you have anything.
I can share with you, I co-run a website with a colleague called Communicating Psychological Science.
Boom.
And really it is about like using short blog posts written in ways that are easy to read and understand, just about how does the science of psych apply to your lives.
Yeah.
So I can send you that and you can share
Perfect.
that.
Put that in the bio, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been awesome, Colin. Thank you for producing this one. We'll be back next week. Not sure who's coming on, but hopefully it'll be someone as good as Emily. So thank you very much. This is the Ethan Claire Podcast Show.